we're back. Numbers guy, where are we at with Neil Young on?
Neil Young. So After the Gold Rush is Neil Young's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, coming in at number 21 in the 1970s, number 2 in the year of 1970, 76 overall, and in Rolling Stone's list, it comes in at number 90.
Oh, wow. That's pretty high.
It is.
We last talked about Neil Young on episode 22 of Combing the Stacks as a solo artist back in season 1, and we talked about him as part of Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young on the first episode of season 2. So this is released the same year as Deja Vu, that Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young album. Later in 1970, obviously this came out. This album is without Crazy Horse. They had their own separate record deal at the time, so they were not on this, and he was kind of going in a different direction anyway. They did do some songs together initially, recording, but he didn't like how they turned out, so he didn't include them on the album. This album was considered his commercial breakthrough, in part due to his success with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. This album has a more acoustic sound, as I'm sure you've heard, and is straight up country songs or country folk music for most of it. Most famously, with the song Southern Man, he condemned the racism going on in the South, and then in response, Leonard Skinner name-checked him in the song Sweet Home Alabama. You can look up those lyrics it's a whole verse, really, about Neil Young, so they
hope Neil Young will remember.
Yes, yeah. John C.
Yep.
Later in the fall of 1970, Neil went on a solo acoustic tour across the U.S. He played songs from Buffalo Springfield, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, older solo material, and new songs not yet released. Remember that CSNY broke up in July of 1970 after their tour, and Crazy Horse had signed their own deal, so Neil was solo at this point anyway, and he continued that tour into early 1971. This album reached number 8 on the Billboard Albums Pop chart. The two singles were Only Love Can Break Your Heart, which reached number 33, and When You Dance I Can Really Love, which reached 93. Most of this album was recorded in Young's basement studio in his home in California. Musicians of note on this album include CSNY bassist Greg Reeves, Crazy Horse drummer Ralph Molina, 18-year-old Nils Lofgren on piano, and who is he a part of most famously?
The E Street Band.
Yep. Yes, he's a member of the E Street Band since 1984, and then Stephen Stills sang backing vocals for Only Love Can Break Your Heart. So one critic really said that Neil maybe intentionally or unintentionally wanted to combine the sounds of Crazy Horse and Crosby, Stills, and Nash on this album. And so that's why you've got multiple people from playing on it, and maybe also the sound of it. The album cover is a solarized photo of Young passing in front of a woman in front of the New York School of Law. Solarization is when a negative of a picture is exposed to light inadvertently. The photo is out of focus as well, so the photographer Joel Bernstein decided to solarize it, and that's why it's got that weird look to it. Songs from this album and the name of the album come from a screenplay, now lost, of an unproduced film called After the Gold Rush. Not much is known about the screenplay other than it's being described as kind of an end of the world type of post-apocalyptic movie. Initial critical reception on this album was mixed. Rolling Stone's Langdon Winter wrote a negative review of it, but Robert Christgau of The Village Voice was positive. So that's what we have. That's all the bio I have for this album. John, what did you think of After the Gold Rush?
I like this album, although I would say I know there are many Neil Young fans that would tell you that they think this is his best album. I actually like the album before this that we covered, and I like the album that we're going to do after this.
Harvest.
Yep, a lot better too. And I don't want to kind of spoil my thoughts on that album. There's a lot of contrarian things I have on this. I actually, even though many of the most well-known songs are on the first part of this album, I actually like the second half of this album better than I like the first half of this album. I think there's a lot of gems in the second half of this album. Not that the first doesn't have great songs too. But that was the thing that stood out to me. Like, wow, there's some really, really good songs on the back end of this. The lyrics are really strong. This is why you like Neil Young, right? He writes songs like this. The guitar, when he decides to rock out, is solid. Even the acoustic songs, it's just very well played guitar. I love that about it. I would say this album more so than the previous album we did, and then Harvest is coming up. The Neil Young voice did wear on me a little bit on this album, more so than it normally does. Maybe that's because the acoustic nature of it is a little bit more stripped down at times, and so you've kind of just got Neil Young's voice running unopposed. I think one of the main reasons that I so welcome Stephen Stills, for example, like when he comes in Only Love Can Break Your Heart. I'm not going to say he salvages the songs. It's such a well-written song, but it's like he's like a welcome guest on that song. After the Gold Rush is both one of my best friend and one of my dad's favorite songs ever. I've always been it's like the ultimate Neil Young song for me, and that there's like half of it that I love and half of it, like his voice, that's like, it kind of moves me that way. But I mean, this is an easy recommend. But it's interesting that you said this was what Sherry noticed, that she didn't like Neil Young's voice, Matt, because even I found myself kind of like,
Yeah.
And I knew that because I know this album and I know what a lot of his other albums sound like. And this is always the one that's kind of sat a little bit. It works on like Southern Man because he sounds like he sounds like what the song should sound like, alarmist, and his voice, especially the shrill part, almost sounds like he's sounding an alarm about racism and stuff. It really works there. But then in other places it doesn't as much. I feel that he kind of tones it down though in the second half of the album, and the songs are a little bit more, for whatever reason, his voice does not stand out as much, and the other pieces of the accompaniments jump out at me. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but yeah, easy recommend, and certainly a great album. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't more of a fan of Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, and we'll cover Harvest, so I won't go into my thoughts on that, but that to me is where he takes this and accelerates it. So
Okay, what about you, Matt?
So I got this album. I remember this distinctly. I was I did a study abroad program in Ireland my fall semester of college in '98, and I went to go visit my other buddy Josh, who was doing study abroad in Paris. And so we went to a record store, and I bought this album, and I bought Harvest, and I also bought the Pink Floyd double live album Pulse. So those, I just remember for some reason that because I didn't have a ton of CDs with me on that trip, because I could only bring so much, so I had only like 10 CDs with me. So this was I listened to these albums a lot then, and so it always reminds me of that time. But I love this record, and it's one of the reasons I love Neil Young. What stands out the most to me is how beautiful some of these songs are. There's some really, really beautiful melodies in here. After the Gold Rush is a beautifully written song. Don't Let It Bring You Down is a killer song. Birds is like a really, really sad song, but just such great melodies, and and there are harmonies in here as well. And I don't mind Neil Young's voice at all. I've really grown to love it. I totally get why people don't like it, why it would wear on you, John, or why Sherry would hate it, other people, just not like it at all. Why is he ruining this song with that voice? That type of thing. And I get it, but it never bothered me. And I love Neil Young's voice. It is more of a it's certainly more stripped down than Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. And I think Harvest, where I wouldn't say that that's like that album rocks out or anything. I think that's more produced, and so this is kind of more Neil Young warts and all, kind of a little bit more vulnerable, as far as the sound goes. But I think it's really good. But he does still make some room for some rockers, like Southern Man is one of his best rocking songs. It's kind of does have that Neil Young guitar solo kind of thing going on, that really raw, chaotic guitar solo that just sounds just so great, and it's very distinctly Neil Young. When You Dance, I Can Really Love is another song that rocks out. It's not as raw as Southern Man, but it's still it's a little bit of a pick me up on the second side of the album. I never thought, John, about side A versus side B. I didn't even really see the breakdown until just now that, that the first side ends with Till the Morning Comes and and then starts the side 2 with Oh Lonesome Me.
Do you guys ever I always with 60s and 70s albums look to see where the album was broken, because I know these were designed to be albums, and so there's oftentimes real deliberate choices made of where stuff is placed, know, and so I don't know. Do you guys look at? I look at that for every album that we do, where it breaks
I
down.
haven't, and I should. You're absolutely right.
Okay.
I should do that more, but
I
no.
do that as well, just so I kind of know what the original track listing was and what the intention was.
Yeah, I mean, I usually do. Well, first I check to see the track listing to make sure that there's no bonus tracks, because I don't want to listen to those.
I do that too. Yep.
Yeah. So, but sometimes I see it, but I don't seek it out the way that you're talking about. But I probably should. And it's got some interesting songs, like the both of the sides I'm looking at now, end with songs that are less than 2 minutes long. Till the Morning Comes is 1:17, and Cripple Creek Ferry is 1:34. So they're
and fades out about 10 seconds out. You know what I mean? So it's really more like 1:24 if you think about it.
Right. So it's I could see where people would say that they're throwaway songs, that kind of similar to the one the shorter songs on the Aqualung album from before. But I don't know. I've known this album for so long, and I like those. I still think they're catchy. It's even though they're not the heart and soul of the album, I don't mind them at all. And I'm fine with them kind of ending the sides the way that they do, and that probably is what you're saying, John, a little bit more of an intentional, kind of thing. But this is just, this is not rocking out Neil Young for the most part. It's stripped down acoustic Neil Young, and with just beautiful songwriting. He's top notch, man. He's right up there with the best of them, and this is just I highly recommend this record. Don't
you think those small songs? And this is where knowing the track listings, they feel like codas to me, don't they? Each one's the coda for each side of it. That's why knowing that track listing, it fit more, because I'm okay, this is a stylistic choice, for each piece.
No, I'm sure it was. Yes,
yeah. I like this album also. But I didn't love it in the way I loved his first album. Everyone knows This Is Nowhere. I think I respond more to the electric Neil Young. He has such a power and kind of rawness to his electric guitar playing, and that comes into here on Southern Man and When You Dance as well. My ears prick up when I'm listening to this album, and then the electric songs come on, because I just respond to them more. But he's at the top, like you guys said. His songwriting is top notch, and he really integrates it well with these country sounding songs and the country folk to it. And it's he's the best there is at what he does in a way on this album. Now, I haven't heard Harvest probably in a really long time, so I'll have to keep that in mind when we talk about that album. But I think that he's going for something different here, and this is another side of Neil Young. That's where his talent is. He can do electric and he can do acoustic really well, and not a lot of artists can say that or do it that well as he can. So I'm not discounting the fact that it's a really pleasant listen, and I also don't mind his voice that much. It's not distracting for me on this album, and he seems to incorporate enough different elements, like the backing singers or different instrumentation, or even putting those electric songs on, that it never becomes distracting, that he doesn't sound the same on every song, or it breaks it up enough that I don't notice it. I liked the flugelhorn on After the Gold Rush. I thought that was an interesting horned instrument.
Oh, is that what that is? Yeah, I was trying to think of, is that the French horn? That's one of those weird, I know it's a horn, but I don't know, it's not a trumpet or a trombone, I know that.
Yeah, I looked it up because I was like, it kind of sounds like a trumpet, but it's not, and it's a flugelhorn. And yeah, I agree with you too, John, that I think the short songs are definitely there intentionally to end the different sides of the albums. I also saw that these are all original songs except for Oh Lonesome Me, which is a cover version by an artist called Don Gibson, which was a country song. And I guess this is a slower version of that song than the original.
I mean, that's one of the most country sounding songs. I mean, he's got the harmonica kind of like slow cowboy kind of sound that he's got going on, so that makes sense.
But yeah, this is another thumbs up for me. I think I appreciate the fact that we're going chronological order, so I can compare this, immediately after his first album. But yeah, I liked it, and I hadn't heard it before. I think I only knew Southern Man, and so it's nice hearing all these new songs.
Yeah. I think if you only knew Neil Young from his debut album, and then you got this, it'd be like, whoa, he's not rocking out as much. I could see people being a little disappointed. Although maybe you got a little sense of that with the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young record.
Right.
Even though it's he's a part of it, it's not his. Everything is his, but it's but I could see people kind of being a little maybe put off or surprised by this.
Yeah, and when we discussed that Deja Vu album, he was the one that would come in with like the crazy guitar parts to counterbalance their harmonies and stuff. So
yeah, he's a fascinating dude. I
Yeah.
don't think I've ever seen a documentary. I didn't look it up or anything like that, but I would love to see a documentary on him.
He doesn't strike me as a guy that's gonna sit down for a documentary about his life.
I haven't seen many documentaries on him. There's a lot of kind of like live concerts and stuff, and there's a lot of like books, bios, and official, unofficial. So that's probably the route you would have to go.
Yeah.
You know what's fascinating about Neil Young, and it's funny because we're about to do David Bowie, who has some of the elements of this too. Like he's a guy that is desperately into what's coming next, right? And yet a lot of people call back to him as saying it's what music should be. But he'd be the last person in the world that would say that because he's always doing something different and kind of vanguarding into the future. And so I find that very interesting about him. He sort of represents the old guard of rock, while he probably would hate the idea of being called, like having a style. Like I almost feel like he relishes, I mean, his 70s and 80s album catalog is much like Bowie, right? He's just veering constantly.
Well, and if you think about it too, particularly, and with Bowie too, but particularly with Neil Young, I mean, if you kind of look at his contemporaries at the time, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, right? Like, they did not have nearly the street cred that Neil Young had, like in the 90s, you know what I mean? Or in future years with other bands that, he's playing with Pearl Jam at the VMAs.
Or now even, really,
right,
when you think about it, yeah.
And, he's, I don't know, maybe he was part of the hippie culture. Like he kind of straddled both worlds, right? He did the hippie thing, but he also kind of didn't buy into it full blown. He's not like this. I don't think of Neil Young as a 60s artist, that's not like, Crosby, Stills and Nash is a 60s band, right? But Neil Young does not strike me as a 60s artist. He's not pigeonholed by that decade. And I think maybe in some ways it's certainly very much a part of who he is naturally, but it's also probably in some ways a conscious decision, on his part to like what projects am I going to partake in, what concerts, how am I going to do this, I think there's some calculation to that as well.
But I think I mentioned before that I thought of like Crosby, Stills and Nash as the ultimate like baby boomer band, and that means they're like late 60s, early 70s, right? Like in my head forever. Neil Young, it's funny that he played with them, and I don't think of him that way at all because he's plowing through. He made like an electric album, a rockabilly album, country albums, proto grunge. I mean, he was always, and I think that's the difference, is that the other guys kind of stayed in their lane a little bit more and played. They did their stuff, but they kind of stayed in the same lane. Whereas Neil Young, you kind of never knew what his lane was. He had vintage parts of him that you could identify, but he always put a twist on it. And I love guys like that who are never content to stay with what they did before. And you're never going to see Neil Young at age 30, 40, 50, 60 like doing like a nostalgia tour. He's always going to be playing something interesting, and that's what's awesome about him.
Well, I think the longer your career is too, and his career has kept going, the you don't get pigeonholed as one type of artist or one type of generation. Like he's fits in the 60s as well as he does currently, and in the 90s and all the different albums that he's put out.
Yeah. I mean, he'll still play these songs. It's not like if you go see a concert, he's like, I'm only doing the new album, you know. He'll still play them, but I agree. I think that it's very much like every album that comes out is like, that's the best album that he's done, you know, at that point. That's really where his heart is. And then as soon as it comes out, he's probably on to the next thing. But yeah, he's done rock operas too. He did that Greendale album. That was the one time I saw him play by himself. He did he had that Greendale concept album. It was like, it's basically like a rock opera. And oddly enough, that was also a show that I went to because obviously Neil Young's politics, he's very left and very anti, war and pro environment, all that stuff. There was a dude at that concert that like towards the end, he was just screaming. He was right behind me. He was screaming, "Fuck you, Neil!" Fuck over and over again. He was just doing this, pointing his finger, and he was like kind of like leaning towards, like as if he was gonna like storm the stage or something. And I'm thinking, who goes to a Neil Young concert?
Right. The same people who go to Bruce Springsteen concerts, the same people who don't know Rage Against the Machine, like is a euphemism. It's pretty amazing that you can listen. They're like you though, Matt. They're like, they don't know the lyrics, I guess. But unlike you, though, you at least stumble into it, like in the anecdotal story. They don't even get that. So,
but you don't even need to know you just have to have some semblance of who they are, what like interviews or stuff that they've said. You know, and it's just like, wow, are you that surprised? You spend like $100 or whatever, and you're gonna get mad, and you're gonna scream at him while he's playing a blaring rock show, as if he's going to hear you. You know, from like 50 rows back. You know,
there's another element of that